Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going into something really specific, something that shows just how incredibly detailed ancient legal systems could be when it came to quality control. We're talking about forensic analysis, rigorous specs for a simple knife.
That's right. If you think modern standards are tough, you really have to hear about the requirements they set up thousands of years ago for a ritual slaughter knife.
And we're diving right into the Babylonian Talmud for this, right? Tractate Chullin.
Exactly. Pages 17b through 18a. And our mission today is to, get past the initial idea of just studying a knife. We're going to extract the actual laws, the ingenious testing methods, and how they defined what a flaw even was.
Okay, let's just jump right in because the level of detail it's extreme. Why did this one tool, the Sheshet knife, need this kind of forensic attention? What was the big legal danger they were trying to avoid?
Well, the core idea is really all about prevention. It's preventative law.
Oh.
If the knife has even a tiny, tiny notch, they call it a pigma.
A pigma.
Yeah. During the slaughter, that little notch could, snag the tissue instead of cutting it cleanly. It would cause a tear.
And if that happens, what's the consequence?
The animal immediately becomes what's called a tarifa.
Which means?
It means it's ritually disqualified, it has a fatal flaw, and is unfit to eat. And eating a tarifa is a very serious transgression. So the knife check is the one critical safeguard that makes sure the whole ritual is valid.
I see. So the quality control isn't just about doing a good job. It's about preventing a huge religious error. And what's fascinating is that the legal source for this inspection was actually debated.
Oh, absolutely. The scholars are always trying to find the highest authority for a law. You have Rav Yeimar, for example, who tried to ground it right in the Torah itself. He pointed to a verse in 1 Samuel where Saul says, "Slaughter with this and eat,"
suggesting that this knife must have been pre-approved.
Exactly, that it must have been inspected. But the Gemara, after debating it, comes to a different conclusion. That the mandatory, rigorous examination process we're talking about is actually rabbinic in origin.
So not from the Torah directly.
Right. It was an ordinance they put in place because the risk of someone accidentally eating a tarifa was just considered that severe. The verse is more of a support, a textual hook, what they call an asmakta, not the primary source.
It's a protective fence, and it sounds like a very thick one. I saw a note in there about the social aspect of it, too.
Yes, precisely. Rabbi Yonan mentions that sometimes a person would show their knife to a local scholar, not purely for the legal check.
But why then?
It was done out of kavod hacham, out of respect and deference for the expert. So you have this kind of soft regulation happening alongside the hard law.
Okay, let's get into what I think is the most amazing part of this. Before they had a single standardized test, they had all these regional, almost personalized methods. They sound like something out of a detective story.
This is where human perception becomes the high-tech calibration tool. It's incredible.
So talk me through the regional ones first. How on earth do you test a knife with the sun or with water?
Okay, so in the West, which means Eretz Yisrael, their method was visual. They'd hold the blade up in the sun.
When just look at it.
And look for the tiniest shadow or a flicker in the reflection, anything that would give away a notch. It required, amazing eyesight.
And perfect weather, I imagine. What about Neharde'a? Their method was even more complex.
Right. In Neharde'a, they used water. They would lay the blade on the surface of still water. The idea was that a microscopic flaw would disturb the surface tension,
Wow.
or it would change how the water clings to the metal, revealing a flaw the eye might miss.
That's just ingenious, using physics to find flaws. Yeah. But then you have the personal techniques, which are even more, unbelievable.
They really are. You have Rav Sheshet, for instance.
What was his method?
He would examine the knife with the tip of his tongue.
Wait, his tongue. On the blade.
On the blade, yes. Because the tongue is so incredibly sensitive to texture, much more so than a fingertip. He could feel an irregularity no one could see.
I just have to stop there for a second. Can you imagine? The butcher hands this huge, sharp knife to the rabbi, who then runs his tongue along the edge. That's a level of commitment.
It really is. It speaks to how seriously they took this. And he wasn't the only one. There's the famous case of Rav Bar Yaakov.
What did he use?
A strand of hair. He'd draw a single hair across the edge of the blade. If there was any notch at all, even a microscopic one, the hair would catch on it.
The hair's width. That's the standard. But how could these personal subjective tests be legally binding?
Well, the Gemara gives this beautiful justification that came from the Academy in Surah. The principle was, The knife consumes the flesh. Let the flesh examine the knife.
So the test should mimic the function.
Precisely. The whole point is to see how the blade will interact with soft tissue, like an animal's throat. So using your own sensitive tissue, like your tongue or your fingertip, was considered the most direct and relevant test.
Okay, so we're moving from this era of, let's call it personalized genius, to a more standardized system. How do they make that leap?
It really starts to formalize with scholars like Rav Pappa. He tried to create a universal protocol that anyone could follow.
And what did that protocol include?
He said the examination had to be done on the flesh, on the fingernail, and, this is the important part, on the 3 sides of the knife.
The fingernail test makes sense. It's a standard everyone has. But what are the 3 sides?
So the consensus, which was later locked in by Rav Ashi and Rav Kahana, was that you had to check the cutting edge, of course, but also the 2 flat sides of the blade.
The flanks.
Exactly. The idea was that a nick on the side could drag on the tissue just as easily as one on the edge.
But that seems counterintuitive. I mean, you only cut with the very edge. Did everyone agree with that?
No, not at all. And this is where one of the most brilliant technical arguments in the whole discussion comes in, from a scholar named Rav Yeimar. He argued that checking the sides was totally unnecessary.
And what was his reasoning?
To make his case, he uses this this wild analogy.
Okay, what is it?
He brings up the ruling about slaughtering an animal with a white-hot knife.
A white-hot knife. Hold on. Wouldn't that just, cauterize the wound instantly? That sounds like it would ruin everything.
You'd think so, and that's exactly the question that comes up. But the Jamar explains the slaughter is still valid because, and this is the key phrase, Beit hashishita merovach ruvach.
Which means?
It means the area of slaughter separates quickly.
So the argument is that the cut is so fast.
It's so fast that the clean severing from the sharp edge happens before any negative effect from the sides. Whether it's burning heat or, in our case, a small notch, can actually damage the vital organs.
So the physics of the cut makes the state of the sides irrelevant.
That's Rav Yeimar's argument. Because the tissue separates so quickly, the sides of the blade just don't have time to do any damage. It's an analysis of the biomechanics of the act itself. It's just mind-boggling.
Okay, so after all these sensory tests and debates about physics, they eventually have to land on a hard measurement. How small is too small? And this is where it gets really profound.
This is the moment of real standardization. And they do it by connecting this flaw to other flaws in ritual law. Rav Huna bar Rav Katina quotes Rabbi Shimon ben Lekish, and he identifies 3 other deficiencies that all share the exact same measurement standard.
Okay, what were they?
A flaw in a bone of the paschal lamb, a blemish on the ear of a firstborn animal, and a flaw in any other sacrificial animal.
So all of these really high-stakes sacred items.
Exactly. And then Rav Yeimar adds the final piece. He says the deficiency of the slaughter knife belongs on that list too. He basically elevates the knife to the same level of sacredness as the sacrifice itself.
So if the knife is being judged by the same standard as the sacrifice, what is that standard? What's the universal measure?
It was defined by the ultimate benchmark of sacredness. The measure of their deficiency is equivalent to the measure of deficiency that renders the altar unfit.
The altar in the temple.
The Mizbeach, yes.
That's a huge philosophical leap, connecting a simple tool to the actual stone altar. So what was the physical measurement that would disqualify the altar?
The standard they settled on, the one that applies to the knife, is a deficiency sufficient for a fingernail to be impeded on it.
So if you can feel it with your nail, it's out.
Exactly. It's that simple and that precise.
But hang on, there seems to be a huge contradiction in the text here. I remember seeing other opinions from Rabbi Shimon ben Yoai and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who gave much larger measurements for a flaw in the altar, like a handbreadth or an olive bulk. Those are massive compared to a fingernail catch.
That's a great point, and the Gemara resolves this beautifully. Those larger measurements, the handbreadth and so on, they were referring to flaws in the limestone coating on the altar, the plaster.
Ah, so the cosmetic layer. The paint job.
Exactly, something that could be easily repaired. But the tiny standard, the one that's just enough to catch a fingernail, that referred to a flaw in the actual underlying stone of the altar, the avna itself.
So the permanent essential structure.
That is the standard, and that is the standard they applied to the knife. The law is saying the flaw in your knife is being judged against the integrity of the sacred stone, not the replaceable plaster.
That is the definition of absolute quality control.
Wow. The rigor is just absolute. We've gone from a legal debate to these amazing sensory tests with water and hair, and finally landed on this objective physical standard.
And the takeaway really is powerful. It was never just about having a sharp knife. It was about having a flawless one. And that idea of flawless was defined by a standard so demanding it connects this, everyday act of preparing food to the sacredness of the temple altar.
Exactly. And if you're thinking about setting standards in any field today, there's a lesson there. Defining that tiny, non-negotiable flaw, that's what ensures the integrity of the whole system, whether you're building a bridge or performing a ritual.
And that connection leads us to our final thought for you to think about.
Consider the incredible continuity of this legal concept, that the minuscule flaw capable of catching a single strand of hair or impeding a fingernail on a simple everyday tool is measured by the same sacred yardstick used for the stones of the holy altar. What does that connection tell you about the value placed on meticulous detail?